Good afternoon. It's July 21st, 2024, and it's the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And today in our readings, we're invited to reflect upon the sheep and the shepherd. And a lot of the focal point goes on the shepherd, which is fair, but there's also that part about the sheep. And Jesus talks about the sheep without a shepherd. And the problem that we have in our world today is a lot of people don't have much to do with sheep. How many of us grew up on the farm? How many of us had sheep when we were growing up? How many of us have been around sheep? So do we really understand the point that Jesus is trying to make? Now I have to admit, sheep are stupid. They're not a very bright animal. And if you don't move them around from pasture to pasture, and if you don't guide them and direct them, they get lost very quickly. Sheep will stand in the same place and eat the grass right down to the ground and kill the grass. And so you got to keep them moving. You got to keep them moving. And this is a problem. The shepherd has to guide the sheep. And Jesus recognizes this in the people. They are sheep without a shepherd. But there's more to it than that. If we just leave it at that, we're getting nowhere. Part of this is, what did Jesus recognize in us? Like if you've got a flock of sheep with no shepherd, right, and they're just out in the field, if a flock of sheep comes by with a shepherd, those sheep will come over because they recognize being guided. Sheep are smart enough for that. But us, do we recognize our need to be guided? Do we recognize our need to be directed? Do we recognize our need for a shepherd? See, every one of us comes into this world created in the likeness and image of God, and so we have nature. But at the same time, as we grow, we have nurture. And so we're made up of this nature and nurture, what God has given us and what society, the world, our family, our friends gives us. And what God gives us is pure. God calls us to holiness of life. He gives us the gifts, the talents, and everything that we need to do it. But how do we nurture that? And how do we bring it to the fullness of completion? But do I even know what these are? Do I know what the gifts are that God has given me? Have I plumbed the depths of who I am? And that requires us to take a good long look at ourselves. In the scriptures, it tells us, what does God desire? God desires a humble, contrite heart. But humility is being able to look at ourselves in honesty and say, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. I need to work on my strengths and accentuate them, but I also need to work on my weaknesses to turn them into strengths. But that means I need to be honest about who and what I am. It's kind of like setting standards, right? We go through school, the teacher set the standards, the principal sets standards, right? Our family sets standards. But how often do we come up short of the standard? And how often do we realize that we could have gone a lot farther than the standard that was set for us? It's kind of like going into an exam, writing the exam, right? Getting 100% on it and realizing that you really didn't know the material. You still managed to get 100 because the standard was down here, but if the standard had been up here, you probably wouldn't have done as well. We know within ourselves, and if we're honest with ourselves, we know when we've done our best and when we haven't. And so the challenge that you and I have is to be able to look at ourselves and know who we are. Know what our gifts are, know what our talents are. Do I need to work on my knowledge? Do I need to work on my wisdom? Do I need to work on my understanding? What about my courage? What about my piety? What about my reverence? What about my fear of the Lord? What about my good judgment, my good counsel? Which of those do need to be worked on? Do I need to work on the corporal works of mercy? Do I feed the hungry when I have the opportunity? Do I clothe the naked when I have the opportunity? When was the last time you went through your closet and emptied out everything that you don't need that's been sitting in the closet for years, going nowhere? Do I give shelter to the poor? Do I think about those that are homeless? Do I give a glass of water to somebody in need? It's the summertime. It's very, very hot out there. You go down the street, you'll see people have put out bowls for water for dogs as people walk their dogs. Do you carry water bottles in your car? If you see a homeless person, would you get that bottle out and hand it to them? Do we think about anybody but ourselves? This is part of our struggle. Do I recognize that I'm not as generous, I'm not as compassionate, I'm not as understanding as I should? And am I working on it? Or do I even bother to look? Like, there's lots of people who are totally unaware. And some of them are very happy going through life that way. But that's not what God calls us to. God calls us to something much higher. And so Jesus says to the disciples, his apostles, that come back, rest a while. But Jesus takes over and he teaches. See, you and I are supposed to do what we're supposed to do, and God will do what God's supposed to do. But for you and I to do what we're supposed to do we know what the gifts and talents are that we have? And are we making use of them and putting them there forward to the best of our ability? There's an old saying, know yourself. And it's very true. Do we really know ourselves? And have we challenged ourselves to be everything that God created us to be? Do I know my strengths? Do I know my weaknesses? Can I be honest and humble to acknowledge those and do something about that? It's a long journey, and some days it's a hard journey. But to be able to say, this is me, and know that truly is you, that would be a good thing. Scriptures tell us that Jesus reads the heart. Do I know the deepest desire of my heart? Do I know the greatest want and desire that is within me? How well do I know myself? Because if I don't know myself very well, how can I really enter into that relationship with Jesus? He knows me completely, but I need to get to know me so that relationship is balanced, fruitful, and something holy and gracious in God's eyes. It is July 21st, 2024, and it is the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time. May God continue to watch over you, bless you, keep you safe all the days of your life.